Good morning, everyone. My name is Sue Murphy, and I proudly serve as the president of the Robert H. Jackson Center, and it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you here today. This year, 2018, marks the Jackson Center's 17th year of promoting liberty under law through the examination of the life and work of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Robert H. Jackson and its relevance to current events and issues. One of the programs we take special pride in is our Defenders of Freedom project. The stories you are about to experience are selections from over 225 interviews of local veterans conducted by Greg Peterson, co-founder and board member of the Jackson Center, and Phil Zimmer, who has been a driving force behind the effort and success of this project. The Defenders of Freedom project records, preserves, and shares these oral histories and works to make them increasingly accessible to the broadest possible audience today and for generations to come. I invite and encourage you to visit our website, roberthjackson.org, to find a number of Jackson resources right at your fingertips and information on our past and upcoming programs. I also hope you will all come back again and again to visit the Jackson Center and enjoy our exhibits and our programs. Director of Development Marion Beckerink and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have about the center after today's program concludes. And we encourage you to add your name to our mailing list and pick up a newsletter and a small handout providing information today on the website addresses where all of the Defenders of Freedom interviews can be accessed online. Now, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't, number one, thank all of our Jackson Center donors for their support. And a group of many of you who are here today are part of that group, so thank you very much. And number two, to ask you to consider supporting the Jackson Center again in 2018 with a gift to our annual fund and or by supporting us through a gift to our endowment. Endowment is critical to the sustainability of any not-for-profit, and I would like to say a special thank you to Phil Zimmer, who in 2017 created a fund at the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation for the benefit of the Jackson Center in honor of Al and Marge Brown. This fund will help to ensure that we can continue to provide programs like this one today. Thank you, Phil. And thank you, Al Brown, for inspiring this generous philanthropic gift. Please also help me thank our sponsors and partners for this event and all of the many people involved over the years in this Defenders of Freedom project, and specifically the Veteran Service Agency Dwyer Program, Fenton History Center, and particularly Barb Cessna, Project Coordinator for Vets Finding Vets and Offender History Center Program, Chris Burt, who collected all of our Defenders of Freedom YouTube videos and posted them on Access Channel 5. Also, thanks for technical assistance from Air Force retired William R. Steele, Senator Kathy Young, Raleigh Kidder, Al Brown, Ron Cotton, Gary Chillicote, and I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly, Dennis Myers, Jane Johnson, Ed Tomasini, Jim Johnson, Steve Massa, where did I find him? He's up there somewhere. There he is. Thank you, Steve. Greg Carlson. Cindy Reedy is also here from the Dwyer program, and all of our friends at the Fenton and various Jackson Center interns. As you can see, there are many people who have made this a reality, and this is by no means a complete list. But before we start our program, and most importantly, please help me recognize all of the veterans we have here in our audience and their family members today, and express our deepest gratitude for all who have served our country so selflessly. We thank you and we honor you. Thank you.
We're focusing this morning on 6 World War II veterans. We had, as Susan said, more than 225 veterans we could have focused on. It was very difficult to select 6 out of that entire crowd. I did it based on how they tended to strike me individually. And it was a hard decision who was in, who was out. I must say that the 6 that we picked, I think, did a very, very fine job. talking about their experiences in World War II. There were easily another dozen or so that we could have selected as well. But for time purposes, we had to narrow it down to 6. We do have, as handouts, a little tab where it'll show you where you can go on the internet to find the recordings of all the veterans that we interviewed. As I say, there's more than 225 veterans. Now this morning we have 4 or 5 World War II veterans here with us, and I think we're very fortunate to have those individuals with us. One of them is Lester Bishop, who's sitting down in front. We also have Winston Fraxon, Joe Frontera, and Lester Weavers. Let's have a round of applause for those veterans, please. Judd Benson. And also Judd Benson, too. Excuse me for missing it. Thank you. While I'm at it, have I missed any other World War II veterans also? Yes, please.
My friend
Joe Caniglio from Fredonia, yes. Thank you. We're very honored to have those individuals with us today, and we're very fortunate to have had so many people who were involved in World War II and made such a significant difference for this country and for the world as a whole, I must say. It was the world's greatest man-made catastrophe, I argue, in history. We lost totally in the entire world 65 million people, 65 million. The United States and Great Britain lost approximately 400,000 each. The war was awful, as most people know, and these men here stepped up to the plate and did what needed to be done, and we're very grateful for their service. Thank you. Thank you very much. We also have one of our interns from Fredonia with us today, Perry Pearson, who did a good job writing articles for us that appeared in the national press. 2 other interns could not make it today, Matt DeWind and also another intern, Abby Blind, who could not make it. This is a copy of one of Abby's stories that appeared in the national press. It came across very, very well. It was in American World War II. Matt DeWind from Rochester, another intern, has a story on Lester that's slated to appear fairly soon in the going as well. And we're looking forward to that. We're not here today to hear me talk about World War II. We're here to hear the individual veterans talk about World War II and what it meant to them and how they contributed to the war. With that, let's get the session started here.
1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Let's do a quick summary of, so we're all on the same page. The war officially started on September 1, 1939 with the invasion of Poland. December 41, after 27 months, the U.S. officially entered the war. As you know, we were working with the British and others to provide them with destroyers and other items. Over in Eldred, Pennsylvania, they were building mortars for the British troops as well. We were slowly gearing up for what we thought would be a war, and obviously the Japanese brought it to us on December 7th, 1941, with the attack on Pearl Harbor. Early December 1941 is very significant for several reasons. That's also the time frame that the Soviets pushed the Germans back from the gates of Moscow. I argue that's a very significant battle because that's the first time that the German troops actually suffered a serious setback. They were pushed back 75 to 100 miles from Moscow, thanks to a young general by the name of Zhukov, who came in, brought along several brigades of troops from Siberia with him, and they pushed the Germans back at about that time. It also marked the beginning of the war for the United States, and another factor that a lot of people miss is it's also the time frame about 3 days later, December 10th, I think it was, Germany declared war on us as well. So we were suddenly all in on this. It was no longer playing, sliding things around behind the magic blanket. We were in for the duration, and we had many young men, such as the men sitting here in the front row and elsewhere, who stepped up to the plate and went to war. Many of them were not even old enough to have driver's licenses. And they were in for the duration. It was not like these modern day wars, like the Vietnam era, where you did your 13 months overseas and hopefully you came back and tried to resume your life. World War II, they were in for the duration. And as I say, many of these men did not even have their driver's licenses, and suddenly they were flying airplanes, they were driving tanks, they were out there doing what needed to be done, and they did a tremendous job. The war in Europe ended in May of 1945. That's very interesting too, because there really are two end dates for World War II. The Soviets recognized the end of World War II about 2 days after the Allies in the West. That's because the Western Allies accepted German surrender 2 days earlier in Reims, France. The Soviets, of course, were quite upset about that because they were allies, they were not part of that. So they insisted, I think rightfully so, they insisted that there be a full-fledged peace treaty signed in Berlin with the Soviets present. And so that's what happened. And that explains why we recognize one date, and the Western Europeans recognize that date for the end of World War II. The Soviets and the Eastern Bloc, or what had been the Eastern Bloc, oftentimes represent and recognize a later date, a few days later. The war in the Pacific ended in September 1945 with the signatures aboard the Missouri. And as I said, there were 65 million people estimated killed worldwide. Hundreds of thousands were displaced across the globe. And 7 decades later, the war continues to shape history. We see obvious difficulties in eastern Ukraine. We saw the Crimea situation develop and unfold in front of our very eyes. All of that is a result indirectly of World War II. We also have the UN. We have a basic set of human rights issues that have been resolved thanks to the Nuremberg trials, and it continues to impact our lives to this very day. I want to show now an interesting series of numbers. These numbers, when I first saw them, just blew me away. 1, 7, 20, and 85. 1, 7, 20, and 85. What it means is, for every American who died in World War II, civilian or military, or Brit who died in World War II, for each one of those individuals, 7 Japanese died, 20 Germans died, and 85 Soviets died. 85. This gives you an idea why even today the Russians get twitchy when they start talking about World War II. Of the 65 million people, they lost approximately 25 million people. Now that 85 number is a little misleading because it includes people living in Ukraine and Belarus, which were then part of the Soviet Union. It also includes a lot of Soviet-on-Soviet deaths. If a soldier had been captured by the Germans and somewhere along the way helped to offload a truck in return for a little piece of bread, later when they were caught up by the Soviet army, if the Soviets knew about that, that soldier may have been shot out of hand as a traitor. He may have been sent to the Gulag, or heaven forbid, he might have been assigned to a penal battalion for 6 months to a year. The Soviet penal battalions were used as shock troops against the Germans, just rushing forward into machine gun fire. At other times, they were used to clear minefields. I'm not sure how many people here realize how the Soviets cleared minefields. Any ideas? They did it the old-fashioned way. They lined up the penal battalion people, and they had them march through the field. And if they lived to tell about it, there were no mines in the field. If one or two got blown up, well, they found where the mines were. Zhukov and others found that to be a very efficient way of clearing minefields. They did not need to rely on technology and other means of doing it. It was a brutal war. There were no, in the Eastern Front especially, there were no sides given either way. Kill or be killed, that was it. The interviews we're going to be talking about today are Angelo Zanghi, who was with the U.S. Navy. We also had Anthony Costanzo, U.S. Army, Conrad King, U.S. Navy, Dominic Spitale, U.S. Marine Corps. Lester Bishop, who's here in the front row, is going to talk about, as you'll see him on the screen, talking about his experiences being shot down over France. He was a U.S. Army Air Corps. And Vivian Taylor, U.S. Army veteran, a black soldier in a segregated U.S. Army fighting against racist Germany. He has some very interesting stories to tell, some of which still sends a shiver up my spine on how the blacks were treated in World War II. These are all 7-minute segments, highlights of their interviews. The interviews themselves ran an hour to an hour and a half long. We're showing you the highlights here, but as I say, on your way out today, please do pick up one of these from the desk out front, because it'll give you access and show you ways to get to the websites that do show the full interviews with all the gentlemen we're showing today, as well as the other veterans that we've interviewed over the years. Angelo Zanghi served on a destroyer in the Pacific. He's one of the favorite individuals I interviewed. Greg Peterson and Greg could not be here today because of a family matter, and he told us to carry on. And knowing me, he knew I would carry on. But Zanghi was one of the more interesting ones we interviewed. Greg and I went over to Portland early on a Saturday morning, chilly, cold Saturday morning. We were supposed to get there about 9 o'clock. We got there about 10 of. His wife ushered us into the kitchen. Zanghi was standing there facing the wall, talking to the wall as we walked in. And she said, "He'll be done in just a minute." And he continued to talk to the wall. And Greg and I looked at each other and we kind of figured, well, this interview is not going to last too long. This will be one of those in and out sort of things. But he fooled us. He surprised us. He was wired up and talking to a contact on the other side at the Veterans Hospital in Erie, Pennsylvania. They were reading his blood, monitoring his blood heartbeat and so on and so forth, and talking to them at the same time. It totally startled us when he turned around and we saw him wired to this telephone device. It worked very well for him. He sat down and was very, very gracious. You'll hear him in just a second now. His voice is very weak. He passed away about 6 months after we did the interview. But listen closely, because the story he's going to tell, not only about the great Maine potato episode, which I had never heard of, and Greg hadn't either, but he's going to tell us about some other things that occurred to him in World War II. So let's now hear what Angelo Zanghi had to say during that interview.
Hollering out, "Hold him, hold him." We had a pretty good guest. Eleanor Roosevelt wanted to view us, so we had to stand to attention, and I could almost reach out and touch Eleanor. That's how close she was. In the 4th week, I was on my way to Boston to help put a ship into commission. The ship was a new type of destroyer of the Fletcher class. That's the name of my ship, the O'Bannon. I was a pointer on one of the 5-inch guns. Our first engagement was November the 13th, 1942, under Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan. We were 4 destroyers, 5 cruisers, and 4 more destroyers in line. When you're in battle, you're in line, what they called a T formation, that you could, if you can catch the Japanese in this type, you got all these guns firing at them. So we got into the T formation, was able to do some damage. I used to be suspicious about Friday the 13th. That battle took place Friday the 13th. 2 destroyers were blown out of the water. One of them was the Cushing. The 3rd one was damaged by this Japanese battle wagon. It was a 14-inch gun. Every one of the shells, the reason why we didn't get hit, we were within 1,500 yards of the Jap fleet. And every shell that came out of that 14-inch gun went over us, because we were that close to them. I mean, the last battle that we were in were 3 destroyers: the Selfridge, the Chevalier, and the O'Bannon, in that order, against 9 Japanese destroyers. It was a night battle. The Salvage took a torpedo. The Chevalier took a torpedo. The Chevalier was the same type of ship, and we were in line with one another, doing about 35 to 40 knots. And when the Chevalier took the torpedo, she almost stopped dead in the water because her engine room was hit. And we had to avoid cutting it in half. We had to steer to starboard. If we hadn't have done that, we'd have did more damage to our ship than we really did. But we hit it, glanced the side of it, and we lost about 25 or 30 foot of our bow when we hit the Chevalier. We were out there just cruising slowly, patrolling. A Jap sub came up. They did not know we were there. And they were at a distance where when you threw something, you can hit the target. Some of the boys, I didn't do it because I was at my station. And there was this potato bin out there where they had the potatoes stored. The guys just put those potatoes up, started tossing them, while the Japs, they finally knew that we were there. They were running for their 3-inch deck gun, and everybody, the guys that were throwing the potatoes, was throwing them at these guys, and they thought, the Japs thought it was grenades, and they were running back. And we got a plaque from the state of Maine. You tell people about that, oh, come on, don't give me that bone. But it's the truth. I'm glad that I fought during World War II and aboard the U-Bed.
So this series of interviews, it's amazing how 70 years after an event, the emotions are still very evident on these people, as you would expect. I mean, they were oftentimes in a life or death situation, and they were relatively young men at that point, and they were not conditioned to many of the experiences that they were faced and presented with. But they obviously did a very good job, and we're very grateful for their service. The next one we interviewed that we have here is Tony Costanzo. Tony served with the Big Red One. He fought across North Africa through Sicily, later was involved in the D-Day landings in France. Tony had an amazing personality. He's passed away at this time too. Only 2 of these men that we've interviewed here are still with us. Lester is one of them, Vivian Taylor is the other one. The rest have all passed. But Tony came into the room to be interviewed here at the Jackson Center, and he just filled the room with his personality. Very strong personality, very likable individual. He had to grip a handshake of his grip was like a python's grip. I'll never forget that. Here was a guy who was 90, 91 years old and had a handshake that would crush the hands, could crush bones in my hand, I swear to God. It was so strong. He described several humorous incidents, like visiting his grandmother in Sicily after the fighting was over with. And as you listen to what he has to say, listen to what he says about Patton and Clark. We set him up on that. I passed a quick note to Greg, and I said, first ask him about Clark, and then ask him about Patton. And you'll see how he rises to the bait and says what I was hoping he was going to say about the 2 generals. So let's listen to what Tony Costanzo has to say about his service in World War II.
We was going up in a truckload of convoy. It was at nighttime, you know. I says, and all at once, you know, these planes, the German planes coming over, and they drop the flares, lights up the whole place, you know. Holy nugget. And all the guys ran on this side, you know. And I blew the whistle. They all ran on this side. I said, what the hell? Huh? So I ran on this side. I said, what the hell? These guys are going over there. Then when it was all over, guys, captain blew the whistle, everybody getting on the truck. And I'm laying flat over there on that one side there. And come on. The way I went in, the way I came out, and he's looking at me. He says, "Geez, you're one hell of a lucky guy." And he says, "That place is all mine." You know, they knew where the mines were because they had mines, you know, because the engineer guys mined it before. Boy, you're lucky. Yeah. We had the lieutenant, second lieutenant, we just got him, you know. He says, "Costanzo, get out of the tank and crawl up there and I think they see if they could get them guys, the Italians, to surrender." They thought I was one of them, you know, because I was talking Italian. "Oh, you're on American side?" "No, I said, I'm an American, you know, surrender, and if you retreat, the Germans going to kill you, you know that, you know, and surrender, and we'll take you prisoners, you know." And meanwhile, the goons were coming up, the infantry were coming up from behind, you know. So, almost this, and you know, they were the, what they call the bristlery, you know, the cream of the crop. The guys they fought in the deserts all the time, you know, war before, you know, they had the hats with the feathers on. They're like the Marines, you know. I said, there was a whole bunch of them, you know, and then they surrendered, their hands up. So got down there and they stripped off all the ammunition, threw everything down. And finally I see my grandmother, you know, after it was over, I got a 2-day, was a 2-day or 3-day pass, you know. I went down. She was not in Tutturici. She was in Termini. Yeah. So I went to Termini, and so I was at Termini, and see my grandmother there. And by golly, she died when she was 104 years old. She was smoking stogies. Could you imagine that? Yeah, stogies. And she said, "Oh, and you know," he said, "You stay. I don't want you to go to war. All the people there will protect you and hide you." No, Grandma. I says, "That's desertion. They'll line me up and shoot me." He said, "Oh no, I can't do that." I know, Clark, he hesitated. I think he hesitated too much. He hesitated. "Patton, no, you dammy, he gonna push it. No hesitating, we're gonna take it. We're gonna take it." Boy, them lieutenants, and then some of them one-star generals, and boy, they were scared of Patton. I'll tell you, they did what Patton wanted to do. That was it. Yeah. That was it. I'll tell you one thing. I don't hear anybody talk about Patton. That man was the greatest general. I think he was the best general in the United States. I don't care who, what. But if we didn't have Patton, the Germans would have won that war. You know, the guys at an invasion Normandy and Omaha Beach, we had new guys, you know, from the States in England, you know. They kept shipping the guys to England. The guys were new guys. They'd never been in combat, you know, all that stuff. All they were in maneuvers in the state. But us guys, we was an invasion of Africa, Sicily. We know what the hell to do, you know. And these guys, when they got to the beach, they just got up standing up. They were getting mowed down. But the guys that been through it, we didn't stand up. We were crawling. We were crawling down there, getting behind them big things over there. So I got behind one of those, and them guys were standing up like candles. They were getting mowed down. Everything was flying all over the place, you know. So finally, we had those tubes, what the hell they call the tubes anyway. Them tubes, you keep shoving them over there, and then to make a hole through that damn place so we get through, and they finally, ships finally blew a hole up at the top of the thing there, and when we blew another hole up, and then finally we got through. Before nightfall came through, we got through, and then we started kicking that. Then from there, we got to the hedges. We got to the hedges, you know, what they call the hedges. The goddamn Germans were on this.
The hedgerows, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, finally we got past the hedgerows.
Once you met him, you remembered him. He was a very remarkable individual, very powerful individual. I'm glad he was on our side, I must say. Yes.
Just want to interrupt you for a minute. 2 years ago, I interviewed Tony for a gentleman that was going to school at Southern Mississippi, and he was doing a story on an Italian American that fought in World War II. He got my name from the Elder Museum, so I interviewed Tony for a whole week. I did his life story from the time he was born here until he just passed away just a few months ago.
Yeah. He's a very remarkable person. As I say, I'm glad he was on our side, not the other side. The next one we're going to talk about is Conrad King. He served on a battleship, the South Dakota in the Pacific. He did see the surrender of the Japanese aboard the Missouri at the end of the war. He had some very harrowing experiences, including one point a Japanese bomb came into his gun turret on the South Dakota and blew up that turret. He'll tell you about that himself, first-person view of that. Let's hear now what Conrad King had to say about his experiences in World War II.
Before the Army, Navy went aboard shore, they would drop bombs on the battleships and cruisers, and we were firing a 40-millimeter gun, and Japanese come down. He dropped a 250-pound bomb right in the center of where we were. Now, the area we were in was no farther than that back wall. In other words, say the gun was right in the middle, and we were surrounding. The 8 of us were there handling ammo, and we had what we called 20-millimeter machine guns, and they were firing at these planes when they'd come in, too. But this plane got through, dropped the bomb, and there the 8 of us were around. The bomb hit right in the center of the area we were in, where that quadrant was. I was laying flat out. I looked up, I looked around. All 7 of the men were dead, except me. I was the only one that survived. We went aboard at the ship I was on, South Dakota. We had I don't remember how many, maybe 10 sailors that went aboard the Nagato. In other words, we had a small boat that destroyer that took us alongside, and we went aboard, and they had a small crew of Japanese that stayed aboard. The rest all were evacuated when they signed a peace treaty. But we went ashore, and we took over and got a signature from the men in charge that we had taken the ship over. And at that time, like I say, I operated on my own, and we had the opportunity to do it. So I saw this flag, Japanese flag, hanging from the yardarm, and another buddy and I went up, took the flag down. That is the flag.
Why don't you pull it out? We'll get a formal picture of that, but that's amazing.
Yeah. See, here's where they hooked it to the yardarms. And so I've kept that folded in my house since I got home. When Eisenhower was president, he was Missouri. They were going to, at the first indication, they were going to sign the peace treaty aboard the USS South Dakota. And Eisenhower said no, they're going to sign it on the Missouri. Now, we were tied up, Missouri, South Dakota. If you can imagine, two big battleships, and they had a rail around the side. And this was the official signing of the peace treaty that the war was over. And we weren't going to see any more shooting or firing or anything, even though it's all over with. It's something that you will never forget. And I'm sure that every serviceman that was on either side, on the European side or on the Pacific side, there were days and there were weeks, there were months of things that happened that will never leave their minds.
Aren't these stories amazing? The next interview is coming up is Dominic Spitale. And it horrifies me every time I think of poor Dominic's mother, because she had 5 sons, but 4 of them all served at the same time in the Army and in the Marines during World War II. And I can't even imagine that. And then he went into in 1942, he went into the 6th Marine Division, and before the end of his time in the war, he was in the Army. And so you'll hear about that. He was a scout and a sniper inside enemy lines on Okinawa, and during that time he was shot in the head. And a lot of things ensued after that. But what I'd like to focus on, because you'll hear him talk about all of that in his interview, but after the war, Dominic went back home. He had a long recovery, 11-month recovery. Ended up marrying Rosalie Fiorella. They had 3 children. He worked at Watson Manufacturing and retired after 37 years. And always ever after, his buddies that he served with in his unit, who were completely amazed that he survived, because they were sure he had died, and he was left for dead. Somebody spotted that he was moving and took him to an Army hospital, but up till that time they thought he was dead, and even in his own unit. And so, but he enjoyed his brothers, who all had similar and yet different stories, and the other veterans that he served with in that unit, and they probably kept each other kind of stabilized. But listen to this interview and be amazed.
When they took it to boot camp, that was Parris Island, see. And matter of fact, we were 3 from Jamestown, and they separated us. They didn't want us near each other. I went to North Carolina, had training on how to shoot a flamethrower or something like that. We formed the 6th Marine Division in Guadalcanal. Well, we got aboard a ship, see. We were about 100 guys, and we got aboard ship. And it took us out on the island, because I remember going down on the rope, you know, to get out. You got to climb that rope down, and they let us out and then they left us. Well, we were never told where we were going, see. It's going towards Japan, whatever island we hopped, you know. They sent 3 of us to find out where the Japs were around us, because we were getting hit on this side and that side, and we didn't know to go forward with it. This is nighttime, see. And it's me and a couple other guys, and the first thing I know, this guy falls. And I got up, I started running. The first thing I know, I felt my head, it was real hot. And I felt the blood coming down, see. And I got shot through the head, and I ran as fast as I could and fell in a foxhole. And I lost consciousness. And the next day, they tell me this. The next day, they picked me up, put me where they're dead. And one guy said, this guy moved, see? And they had a hospital ship right outside, you know. It wasn't a big ship, no bigger than this room. And it took me to Guam, and from Guam they flew me to San Francisco. I don't know what happened to my dog tags. See, I usually had them on, and they said there was no dog tags on me. And then they put me with the dead, and there was a lot of soldiers there that died, see, the week before that. And they put me in an army hospital and stuff like that. And I couldn't talk or see for 3 months, see. And my face was on this side like that. And the doctors, they didn't know, they couldn't touch me. And it took about 9, 10 months for me to get around to tell them who I was, see. And I can't hear out of this ear, and I can't see out of this eye. And like this doctor told me, so you know, if you had any brains, you'd have been dead. So I thanked him for that. When we had the Japanese in one island, you know, the worst thing I've seen, they got in a cave, and some of the soldiers got in there too, and they had women and kids in there. And we had an interpreter that said, come on out, and they wouldn't come out. So they used a flamethrower in there to kill everybody. A lot of guys I know would cry all the time, and I'd tell them, I said, what are you crying for? He said, I want to go home and stuff like that. Look, you can't, you know, stuff like that. I said, you're just hurting yourself by crying. One thing, I got married about a year after I got out, but I couldn't sleep with my wife. Mm-hmm. She says I was choking her one night, and one night I was chasing her around the room. See, and we had to have different rooms. She had to lock her room up. I told her, I love you. Yeah, you love me, okay. You know, when I come home and I started to walk, I wouldn't even step on an ant. I wouldn't want to kill an ant. My wife would say, what are you doing? You tap dancing? And I says, no. I says, I just don't want to kill that thing there, whatever it is, see. I never went hunting or anything. So that's it.
It's a good thing Mrs. Spitale never knew all of that stuff until she knew he was alive. Oh, poor woman. And then our last interview today is Lester Bishop, who was drafted in August of 1943 into the Army Air Corps. So in his interview, he'll tell you about his plane being hit and going down. It was a Liberator going down in flames. Only 6 of the 10 were able to get out, but Lester was one of them. But the things that you don't hear on the video was how he continued to serve after he served his country. And he went on to marry his lovely wife, Laura, who's with him today. And they had 3 children that they raised. He was the Little Valley postmaster and also carpenter. And more recently, though, he was able to help a woman he met, I believe after he first met Greg Peterson. Her name is Candy Brown, and her father had the same experience at the same POW camp that Lester had, and her father could not talk about his experience. Some people find it therapeutic to talk, some people cannot, and her father could not. But he became a hero to Candy because he was able to help her with the experiences that her own father had. And she's written a book. Is it called The Things You Never Told Me? What I Never Told You is the name of the book, so you might want to look that up. But so this is Lester's story. And Lester, I just want to say, you served your country well, you served your community well, and you serve us well now because you continue to teach people about World War II and that freedom is not free. So thank you.
We just barely got the IP, the initial point, where the bombardier takes over, flying the airplane through the northern bomb site. And he controls the altitude and the speed and the whole shebang. And when he sees the target there, when he sees IP's initial point, is a landmark, very, very visible landmark, sticks out like a sore thumb. And so from the time he hits that point, it's straight and level everything to the target. So everything is constant. And bombs are supposed to hit the target. Well, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. So just about the time we hit the IP, we also got hit. And the 88 hit right between number 1 and number 2 engines on a B-24, which is not good. And of course, there's 600-700 gallons of 100-octane gas still right there in that wing, right there. And of course, that was on fire real quick. But the worst damage, of course, was the damage to the structure of the wing. And blew about 2/3 of everything it held together, about 2/3 of it off or more all of a sudden, bang. And the rest of it lasted, I would say, 20 to 25 seconds before the rest of that wing came off. Now then, B-24 doesn't fly good on one wing. And, but anyway, when that 88 went off, I was within the length of that room in there from it. And when it went off, it gets your attention right off quick. But I knew there was a whole lot of damage there must be somewhere because of all that fire. And then the bailout bell started to ring. Now that's like a doorbell, except you can hear it from here halfway to Jamestown. And it's loud, I'll tell you, you can't miss it, it's loud. My flak helmet had flown off. What the hell happened there? Later, I found I got hit right up here. I took my flak helmet off. Anyway, so the bailout bell began to ring. Parachute set right in the exact same spot that every time I got on the airplane, that's the spot I sit in. Right there, always the same spot. I grabbed it, snapped it on my harness, and the escape hatch in at 17 back there is in the floor. And makes opening maybe this wide and this long. And so it has a D handle down here that's, you walk on this thing all the time, and grab that D handle and snap it up over here against the wall over here. Here's a hole in the floor. And I said, and Marty Lavner, the other waist gunner, and Joe LaRusco, the tail gunner, were right beside me, ready to go. I said, goodbye, fellas, and out I went, head first. Marty said, I almost kicked him in the face when he went out. His face was right behind my feet going out that hole. Joe never made it. With only one wing, it tips up this way. Now the hole in the floor is now a hole in the ceiling, more or less, see? That's why 4 of them didn't get out. They didn't have time. And as I say, from the beginning, from the time of that explosion to the time I left, I don't think it was over 20 seconds. We went to about 500 yards or maybe to a French house in this edge of this little village of Lalande Saint Simeon. So these other 4 guys from our crew came in. They made 6 of us all together. He had his parachute. So the French Red Cross gals, they were feeding us, and we gave him that parachute, one of them, and they made 12 handkerchiefs, 12 pieces just like that, and 6 scarves. They cut panels out and hemmed them up. The scarves were probably this long and this wide. Well, the Germans took the scarves away from it, because you could wrap them around the guy's neck, pull them pretty tight. And so they took, but we kept the handkerchiefs, of course, and I managed to get one of them home. In Orbeck, and finally we were there, I don't know, maybe 5 days altogether. And but the Canadians were getting pretty darn close. As I say, they got to Orbeck just 2 or 3 days after we left. And then they put us on a train. And the French boxcars, the French boxcar had single trucks on each end. They're about, on the inside, approximately 7 feet wide, and I don't know just how long, not very long, and you heard the expression 40 men and 8 horses. Well, okay, 40 men would be a lot of them. There were 60. The Germans counted 60 POWs in each one of the little French boxcars. You were crammed in here a little bit tighter than sardines. They had cut 2 holes in the car, one this end, one that end, maybe so square. They nailed barbed wire, a lot of barbed wire on the outside of the car over the top of those holes, so you couldn't climb out. And we had a 10-quart metal bucket. That was our facility. And you were shut in there and locked in there, not only today, but tonight, tomorrow, and the next day for 3 or 4 days to a time. And we got to Amiens, or Amiens, whatever they call it. It took 2 or 3 days or 4. Amiens is a big French town, and we were there in the yards for 2 or 3 couple of days, I guess, right in the same damn cars. But they did let us out once. From there to Berlin. We were on that stupid boxcar, I don't know, for 8 or 9 days. No food, no water, no nothing. And got to the little railroad village there for that place was Kifidi, K-I-F-I-E-D-Y or something like that, as I said in the station. And a mile and a half from there to the actually the compound where we stayed, those 4. The Jerrys had let the camp command, that 4 American compound commanders know that they were leaving that night, but they weren't to advertise it. You didn't let them know until 7 or 8 o'clock, and they left shortly after dark, apparently, because when we got up on my birthday, first day of May, no Germans in sight, nobody in the towers. There's 10,000 GIs, and running all over the place. Someone just took off and left. A lot of them didn't. The village of Barth, and they flew in 10 B-17s to a time, and they had sealed off their bomb bay doors. They could each haul 100, or each haul 30. I'm quite sure it was 30 POWs, and all they came was just a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator, more or less, and radio operators. There were no crew members of any kind. Parents, friends, relatives. And we got there probably 7 o'clock or so. By 7:30 or 8 o'clock, we had a lot of people there. Yeah, pretty teary I was. Anyway, I get this way once in a while. Like the first trip we went back, I told him I wasn't coming back. I wanted to forget. Don't have a lot of years left. That's why I bought a car.
Things up because yes, we do have one more interview, and it's Vivian Taylor Jr. He was born in North Carolina. A lot of people don't know that. And when he was 18 years old, he was drafted out of college there in North Carolina, and he became a corporal in the U.S. Army Reserves, mostly because he was college educated and they pretty quickly moved him into being a corporal. So in his interview, he vividly describes what it was like to be in the U.S. military and be a black man. President Truman finally ended segregation in the military in 1948 by executive order. So, but after World War II, Vivian married his lovely wife, Lula. I'm sure many of you know her. And the two of them came to Jamestown. Vivian had an aunt and an uncle and a sister that were here. And so he joined them. And he became an employee of Marlin Rockwell, and he retired from there after 35 years. But the whole time, they were very religious in their family life before in North Carolina, both of them, and they continued that in Jamestown. They belonged to the Blackwell Chapel, AME Zion Church, but also both of them served in 3 other churches in Jamestown. And until recently, Vivian is still living, and Lula, but he's in the hospital, and we were really kind of hoping he'd make it here today, but that was impossible. But both of them have served through the church, and even Vivian was a council member, Jamestown City Council member, for over 23 years, and Lula was in the county legislature for many years. So they both continued to serve even after his service in the Army, but his is a very different experience from many of the other service members we've heard from, so enjoy.
You had 2 buses. You had the white bus for the white listees, and you had a bus for blacks. The bus stopped for dinner. Well, the white soldiers got off of their bus and walked in this big restaurant, a small town in North Carolina. So we tried to go in there. We thought we would go in there too. But they said, you colored boys can't come in here. You got to be white to come in here. And said, go to the back and go to that window. And the manager of the restaurant said, now you the acting sergeant? I said, yeah. He said, where are your papers? I didn't know what kind of papers he was talking about. Where are your invoices? I didn't even know what the word invoice meant, hardly. And he looked, he said, I got them. He took all my papers out of my briefcase. And he said, now, you boys go to the back and you'll find a window there and line up and we'll serve you. So I said, well, some of the guys said, we want to go to the restroom. Why can't we go to the toilet? And he said, he pointed to the woods. The white boys were going in the restrooms, and he pointed and he told us to go to the wooded black troops. Our outfit was on Section E. And Section E was near the engine, up above the engine rooms of the Queen Mary. And you couldn't have sleep because all that noise from those, it was terrible I think we were on there about 5 days, maybe 5 days. But it was hot down there, and we had a submarine alert and said for everybody to get on the main deck, which is A deck, I think. It took us from Section E down there near the engine room to where we could get to a lifeboat, 2 hours.
My gosh.
Good gracious. The whole ship could have been in the bottom of the ocean by then. Well, the village people gave a party for all soldiers, for American soldiers. And so our commander, he said, no, nobody's going. Stay at camp. But what happened, he had to go to London or somewhere, and the truck loaded up, we loaded up, and these people are just, you know, being nice to American soldiers, the Yanks. And so we went into this village, and we were told, let's stick together now, since we in the village and we at this party, this dance and food, let's stick together. I even said it, as young as I was, I said, don't drink too much at the pub, and when we get to the party, stay in the party and respect these people who are welcome. It was really a welcome party for Yanks. But naturally, two things happened. One of the guys in our outfit, a black, he slips out and goes up the street to a pub and gets half drunk and comes back to the party. And a couple guys white guys from Mississippi goes in the party, who they couldn't hold their tempers. I mean, he gets in there and, what's going on here? These niggas dancing with white women? Don't you folks know that they can't do that in the United States? We're gonna put up with it. Then he started, and this guy from Brooklyn, he says, man, let's try to get along. Said maybe we can get along and be peaceful. This is what this white guy from Brooklyn said. And pretty soon here comes this guy drunk who was going out up the street to the pub, and a fight started. And that was in southern England. And just about the white soldiers and black soldiers could not get along. They sent me to a camp in England. This is in England. A camp where, a demolition camp, mines and all, demolition camp. So I'd attended, had training a couple weeks at least to go to this demolition camp, which I took across overseas with me. Twice I almost lost my life. The hissing sound, I heard the hissing sound, and the minute I threw it and hit the ground, it exploded, but I didn't get hit. In those situations, I don't think I thought of a religion. I just thought of surviving. I mean, because what happened, our outfit, which was the general service outfit, and we had to work. And it was hard building bridges and fixing railroads and all that kind of stuff. But I was on detached service, and I think it was the Minnesota National Guard or somebody that I was with. But while I was on detached service, while we were eating powdered eggs, those white outfits would go to the depot and get good food. Even it started in England. These girls would feel you, not me, but they would feel these guys. They say, what the heck are you doing? Oh, the white Yank said that you guys had tails, and I'm trying to find your tail. You know, stuff like that is the whole system, Greg. It was, but we got through it. Now you say you respect me for what I did. Well, all I did was just be a citizen.
Very powerful. It wasn't until Truman came along later who integrated the armed forces and brought a lot of that to a grinding halt. When I was on active duty in 1969, I saw nothing like that in the U.S. Army. Thank God we made progress. We're very near to the end here, and we're running a little bit over, so I'll quickly run through the next few sections, if I may. All these individuals returned home, quietly resumed their lives. Their recollections, as you can see, are still fresh in their minds, and the emotion and the pain is still there 7 decades later. We still have some lingering questions on World War II. What caused the war? When did it really start? What was the role of the U.S. in the war? What was the tipping point? Now, I argue that the tipping point was December 7th, 1941, as I described earlier. Who really won the war? I think you could argue that a number of ways, and the legacy of World War II. One of the things I'd like to focus on just briefly is when did it really start? I've come to the conclusion that in many ways World War I and World War II could be viewed as one war, 30 years war, another 30 years war separated by a period of peace. And I would argue that that's because many of the issues that caused World War I were not settled at the end of World War I. They quickly slapped a Band-Aid on the festering wound and pretended it would go away, and it obviously did not go away. It wasn't until World War II, and we had the Nuremberg trials, we had the establishment of the UN and several other things that really helped to clean up that situation. Self-determination of peoples, I think, was another factor. Perspectives on World War II, bringing some of the numbers back into perspective. World War I, there were 18 million deaths. The flu pandemic of 1918 to 20, 50 million deaths. World War II, 65 million deaths. And I would argue that might even be a little light on that number, maybe closer to 70 million. Legacy of World War II, former allies in the Soviet Union became superpower adversaries. We entered the war as the dominant power in the world. We were the only ones that had the bomb. Of course, the Soviets had their own ways of figuring out how to get a hold of a bomb, and a few years later, they also had it. Western Europe pursued a European Union to avoid future conflict. Eastern Europe was, of course, taken over by the Soviets. 50 years of Soviet manipulation and control. Nuremberg trials codified human rights. And of course, some of the credits. I was going to ask for questions. I'll be available later to answer questions out there in the lobby. I do want to remind you to pick up these little tabbies in the lobby too. They'll help you to locate the full interviews with these veterans and others that we did here at the Jackson Center. I also want to thank Greg very much too, because he pulled me into this, and he did a very fine job, as you saw in those videos, pulling historical video film footage in and using it as part of the clips to help bring their stories alive. And I think that film footage, historic film footage, really made quite a difference. I'll answer in the lobby too how you build an invisible bridge for all of you who are just dying to know how to do that. There's a trick to building an invisible bridge, and it does not include invisible paint. At this point, I think Susan wants to say something, and then we'll conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. At this time, I would like to invite everyone to join us for a reception out in the timeline room. We have cookies and punch that you can enjoy, and this is being provided compliments of one of the very finest organizations I know of that serves our region and the Chautauqua County area so well, and so importantly, they've been a great resource for us here at the center in our 17 years and have helped us along the way, and that is the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation. The Executive Director, Tori Ergang, is here with us today, and she recently took over the helm from Randy Sweeney, who was here at the start of the Jackson Center in 2001, and we owe a real debt of gratitude to all of their support. So, reception compliments of the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation, and we'll look forward to chatting with you out there. Thank you for coming today.